Now, we've heard from previous speakers about financial distress and how it's a very challenging time. Research tells us that over half the Australian adult population will in fact experience financial stress at some point in their life cycle, with the Australian Psychological Society suggesting that financial stress is the most predominant and primary cause of stress. And Relationships Australia also indicate that financial stress is a major factor in relationship distress. So it's wonderful that we've got these three very capable and knowledgeable women to share their expertise with us today. And I guess when we're talking about financial stress, it's not necessarily just subjective, it can be objective as well. And it can be more than just how much money you have. It can also be about your spending behaviour. And Sian, I understand that you at Enhanced Group have looked at this in particular.
Thank you, Nicola. Yes, it's certainly one aspect of the financial wellness that we try to create for businesses and individual employees. I think it's key to point out that spending habits are created exactly the same as any other habits, but for some reason we don't treat them the same way. So taking opportunities to reflect on good habits and bad habits that we have in our lives are an opportunity to make changes for the better. If you've ever tried to give up anything like smoking, then we're very good at justifying, I just smoke to be sociable, or I just smoke because it makes me part of the gang. And it's actually the same with our spending habits. They're generated the same way. And some of them are good for us and some of them are not serving us and helping us to achieve what we want to achieve. So taking an opportunity to look at what we're actually doing on a daily basis, because it's very easy these days. We have the offer of Afterpay, we have the offer of credit cards being on our mobile phones. It's so easy to spend very quickly. And it could be the difference between recognizing that you grab a coffee on the way to work and then you have another one at 10:30 and another one at lunchtime. And before you know it, that's $25 gone in a day. Or maybe you always feel obliged to buy the coffees when everybody comes for a meeting. And is that actually something that why are you doing that? There's an emotional attachment when we spend. We can justify everything if we choose to, exactly the same with any habit. But it's what is that habit doing for us in the long run? And how is that serving what we want to achieve with our lives? So the first thing we do is get people to think about that. What is it that you want to achieve? And what are you going to do to make the best use of the money that you have available to you, be it income or other resources? What's the best use of that money to achieve what you want to achieve?
Fantastic. And Bianca, I had the opportunity to hear you before, and we were hearing that women's financial status has changed quite a lot in the last wee while. And we're hearing messages that women don't have a lot of super. And certainly I've got 2 children that will graduate with the same degree at the same time. And the research tells me that my daughter will be paid $18,000 less than my son. So women have this disadvantage in terms of income and opportunity, but I'm interested in what your expertise working with women in particular would be to help women.
Yep, so around, I'm not sure what you're asking me, so around education or what we could be studying, or
well, you've got a
into the workforce
plan to help women, and I know that's your target. Would you like to talk about that again for some of the viewers that haven't heard you this morning? Or
well, I think you've raised something that's got me that I'm really passionate about. Is what education for me is something that we tend to do straight out of high school. We get into a traineeship, or we go to university or TAFE or something like that. But what's really important, despite women enrolling in vocational courses and formal education degrees at a faster pace than men for much of the past 20 years, that hasn't flowed through to the same degree to labour market leadership positions. It certainly hasn't. So there's a real interesting thing happening here. What we have is we have more women going into industries that are paid less than men. And largely that's health and education. But that is starting to shift. Unfortunately, there is this graduate gender pay gap the moment we leave university studies. It's just under 5% at this point in time across the board. But there are areas where it's the reverse, such as engineering. You actually have women coming out earning more than men now. And the fastest growing field of study for any gender is actually IT for women. So I am really optimistic about what the future is for women. And I'd be interested to see what happens to your children, Nicola, and what field they go into, because I just don't feel that we are growing up, children today are growing up in a society where that we had 20 odd something years ago. And I feel like it is changing. The problem is it's not changing fast enough. So we have progress. We have reason to feel good. We have reason to, feel heard more so than ever and demand to be heard on key issues and in the workforce and things like that. But there's a lot more work that needs to be done to change decades of inequalities in education and employment and the economy.
I think you made a comment about knowing your worth. And again, because people may not have heard you before when you were talking, did you want to just repeat that? Because I thought that was really poignant for women, about understanding your worth.
Yeah, it's very important, because if I know of many women who will get in a career and, you want flexible work once you have children. I mean, that tends to happen to us, right? So, and it certainly happened to me at one major media provider, where I was so grateful for getting that flexible work that I forgot. I said I kind of didn't push enough for pay rises, whereas I probably actually never worked as hard in my life until that point in time, and I deserved that pay rise. And there's heaps of research out there that shows that we actually don't speak up enough. And now I know this is it's kind of like a sensitive topic, because we don't want to be saying, stop trying to fix women here. It's not our issue to be saying, put your hand up, talk up more, be heard, and all that kind of thing. It's all a bit too much and ridiculous. There's no question that the system itself needs to change. But what we do know is that the more we can put ourselves forward and the more we can get louder and be heard, then surely, as we've seen collectively from movements like Me Too and Time's Up, surely that momentum is having an impact. And I suppose the thing that I wanted to say about valuing your worth, it's important to take that time out of the day. And this goes back to the planned steps I was talking about. Take the time out to really work out what your worth is. And this is important too, not just from a paid employment point of view, and from where you want to go in your career, like have a think about, well, what are the different places that I could be going to earn more money? But once you start to value it, you're then able to say, okay, that if I spend X amount of time in paid work and I'm doing it in unpaid work, then it's kind of not balancing itself out.
So we've heard that from Sian that it's important about you consider your spending, and we're hearing from you, Bianca, that it's really important to know your value and education and make sure that you have a good income and earning potential. Katrina, COVID's put the kibosh on a lot of these things. People are spending differently, people's potential for work is changing, their value in the workforce is changing. Can you tell us what you've learned about people's finances in COVID? Because I think you've done some research in this area.
Yeah, we have. So I guess some of the research actually ties our conversation together quite well so far, because at Wise, we're really interested in finding out about the financial habits of Australians. And of course, within that mix, predominantly is females. And so I think the really interesting thing that we've seen recently is that pre-COVID, there was a rather low level of confidence when it comes to financial knowledge, and just the ability that Australians and in particular females have when it comes to actually knowing what to do next when it comes to their financial position. The stats that we saw from our financial wellness survey that we held at the end of last year was showing that about 84% of the Australians that we surveyed were not feeling confident in the level of their financial knowledge. And we actually saw that increase further post-COVID. So the recent research that we did about a month or so ago now, and which we recently published, has shown that that level of confidence actually hasn't improved. It's unfortunately decreased. And I think that just goes to speak about the uncertain times that we're currently in. On the positive, though, I think it's brought to light the fact that there is such a gap, particularly for females when it comes to understanding their financial position. As we know about finance, it's not just the amount of income that you earn, it's about what you do with it afterwards. And it's the knowledge that you have around, for instance, if you want to set yourself up for the future, which again, our research has shown that probably about 35% of the individuals that we surveyed weren't feeling particularly confident about their future position. That just highlights the fact that we've actually got to look at, well, what are the spending habits of ourselves now? And do we have the ability to understand what types of investments to make for the future? So one of the other findings as well, Wiser is really interested in helping Australians pay down debt faster. And that for females, again, is a little bit of a taboo subject, to be honest. Not even just within female conversations, but it's also just within the workplace in general. And I think we're all today looking at, what can we do from a financial wellbeing perspective at work to support not only just the knowledge, but also the confidence piece within females and within workplaces in general, really. And that level of understanding about debt, that's also come up to the top of the list as well. Because interestingly enough, because of the changes to employment contracts, the lack of certainty with new jobs coming onto the market, because of really just the level of downturn in the economy due to all of these crazy restrictions, which none of us had planned for, let's be honest. We've seen that about 35% of people have had their weekly budget decrease by $500, and about 15% of those have actually seen a decrease of $1,000 a week when it comes to their income. That is absolutely enormous. That is such a big contributor to our just general cash flow. And previously, if we look at what we saw from our findings previously around people, roughly 60% of people not feeling completely happy with how they're managing their day-to-day expenses. The fact that that's now put that added pressure on what they're doing, like I said, from a cash flow perspective, that's particularly concerning, because moving forward, we then have, I guess, again, this whole level of uncertainty which lies ahead of us. And I think it really highlights that fact that now is actually the time for us to be looking into literacy and upskilling ourselves to feel empowered to make those decisions, and then knowing what to do next, not being scared to have a look at that credit card that we have and go, actually, I do need to have a look at that. And why am I paying that interest? Am I getting charged those fees? I think just that level of interest around finance, I think is really, I guess, good. And that's what the research is showing us that needs to happen. But the next stage for us is really looking at, well, how do we do that in a really effective way?
So we understand, and your research confirms what has been published before, that Australians as a population, we have a big problem with personal debt. And although our financial literacy is higher than other OECD countries, apparently it's still far lower than the government would like us to have. What are the various suggestions from the three of you? If you could sort of give people one or two, the best tips to manage debt, what would you be suggesting? Why don't we start with you, Sian?
Thank you, Nicola. Yes, I mean, I think the key one is, it's okay to not know what you don't know, but as soon as you realise you don't know it, you need to go and find out and take that responsibility for yourself. One of the key elements of financial wellness is feeling in control. And you can only create that for yourself, because your financial wellness is going to be very different to another person's financial wellness. And there are key places that you can go and find that information. I think the difficulty is it can be quite a scary space. If you haven't come up with financial conversations around you, that it's embarrassing. There's a bit of shame and a bit of guilt around not knowing what we don't know. But the truth is, it is a life skill, but we're not taught it in school and we're not taught it in universities. And suddenly something in life happens that makes us aware that we don't know and we need to know. And once you get that bombshell, it's time to act. It's time to go out there and find a safe space to actually learn what you need to learn. Make sure you're in an environment where you're not surrounded by financial specialists. I don't have a finance background, I have an education background. So I work to make sure that all the communications we have with people are in a language that they will understand, and not scare them to make them feel, I went through it myself when I got divorced. I had people came and gave me statements of advice that actually had no bearing on my life whatsoever. But I thought these people knew what they were talking about. They all looked very intelligent and had black suits and turned up, and I felt ever so slightly intimidated by them and thought that I should understand. But I didn't really understand what they were saying to me. And probably why I'm so passionate about it now is that it's about getting people into a space where they feel comfortable to say, I don't know this. Will you help me? Will you help me understand what I need to understand so I can take care of myself financially? Because it's the stem for so many things in our life. If we want to go and see somebody about our mental health, we have to be able to afford to pay for that. If we want to go to a gym for our physical health, we have to be able to afford to pay for that. And to my mind, it's all connected. So find a space where you feel safe to say, I don't understand. Please, can you help me understand?
Thank you. So put your hand up. And Bianca, what would you be suggesting as a tip to consider?
I was busy writing down a couple as you were both talking before. For me, having watched many women feel overwhelmed with debt, what I've often found really underutilized, I suppose, or maybe even not known, is the ability of lenders to actually put your repayments on hold. We're seeing that really happen now, right? With COVID, we've seen banks kind of freeze things for 3 to 6 months. So it's really asking your personal loan provider to put your repayments on hold, but also the interest on hold. And that actually can be done. I've seen one of the major banks do that through a debt specialist. There are debt specialist companies around there that can actually help the person in debt. So you're basically creating a bit of a buffer to give yourself the time to pay things back, to get on your feet. I suppose when it comes to debt is you need to go back a step and say, well, how did I get in this position? And sometimes it just creeps up. Sometimes, I know growing up in a single parent household, the debt was on the credit card for my mother because we just needed to live. So the money, we were buying things to live basically. So her credit card was going ridiculous. And then when she'd get a bonus, it wiped all out the credit card, which was great, but there was nothing for her to really celebrate, hey, I've done okay at work. So it's really a matter of, if you're going to use a credit card, try and pay it off within the interest-free period. If you get yourself into debt, see what strings you can pull to actually give yourself time to pay things down or off, put on hold. The other thing I wanted to say is, take advantage of free counselling. You don't always have to pay for a financial advisor. There actually are free counselling services available. I do a bit of work with Wire, which is a Melbourne women's exchange. And I know they're one agency that offer free counselling, but there are actually other places. There is IWF is actually, I shouldn't be, I'm not affiliated with them at all, but I know they're providing free coaching at this point in time because of COVID. There are other places doing that. And then the other thing I was going to say, it annoys me to no end that financial literacy is not mandatory in year 11 and 12 in high school, because suddenly we're lumped with this university debt and the ability to pay it off. We're afraid to get into debt because we think we'll never earn that money to do that doctor's degree or if you're a person now, the communications degree. So it's really something that I think at a policy level needs to change, and we need to see that change in our curriculum too.
Thank you. That was really comprehensive. Katrina, I don't know whether you want to add anything to that, but I was going to say that you mentioned something really important when you were talking before that I think is really relevant to all of us, and that's the taboo. So you use the term, money is a bit like religion. We're taught not to talk about it, a taboo subject. And what are the consequences for people if they don't stick their hand up, which is what Sian was mentioning, and asking for help? What are the consequences for having this taboo subject that people don't talk about?
It stays in the dark. That's essentially what ends up happening. And then what we've seen happen is that debt then spirals because their understanding of the way that money works just isn't there. And it's like anything, if left unattended, it either grows and gets worse or it spirals at the same point in time. So I think to Bianca's point around taking that first step, and to Sian's point as well around putting your hand up. I think it's also that diving in to understand your current position. And if we're looking at like a debt perspective, it's understanding your financial, I guess, how lenders see you as a credit provider, what type of profile you have. And something in Australia that we don't talk about very much in regards to measuring your objective financial well-being is actually having a look at your credit scores. So often that is a great place to start. They're free to check online. You can look at the different bureaus. I mean, Wiser has a dashboard where you can check your couple of credit scores for free and compare yourself against the rest of the Australian population as an example. And that just gives you a really great base to start to say, okay, my credit worthiness is actually, these are my scores at this level. In Australia, it's not something that we talk about. And if you were to ask the average Aussie, I think 83% of people don't know their credit scores. Whereas if you're in the UK or the US, people will be able to rattle them off like that. And it just goes to show like the importance that we place on it, because in Australia, debt is seen as a very negative thing. And for some, if it's not managed well, it can be. I know that a big part of what we do in our area, particularly in the corporate space, is re-educating people around good debt and bad debt, and having a look to see that the tools that a lot of lenders offer is actually debt consolidation. So the major purpose and the major way that we help people is actually understanding that they shouldn't be paying 20-24% on their credit card. They can actually have a much better, much more manageable way of looking at that debt for themselves if they understand how to consolidate it properly. Literally cut up the credit card and get rid of it, and then start working on ways of building those smart spending and smart saving habits to then pay that debt down faster. And that's that kind of level of just taking one step, which would be my second takeaway. Like understand where you are, check your credit scores. It's easy to do. And then the second then being take one step that will help you pay that off faster. It might be setting up a little mini savings account on the side. It might be looking at some type of app that allows you to round up in the background. Technology is really on our side at the moment. And I know, just from internally, I know that there's a lot of behavioral economics that are getting built into technology now. I've seen it and heard it talked about in the conference over the last couple of days in health tech, and now it's making its way into finance, which I think is absolutely phenomenal. And I think those two, I guess those two steps are really a great place to start.
And, I guess as the psychologist, we know that not talking about things can make people feel isolated. People can have feelings of shame and embarrassment, and they become immobilizing. And what I'm hearing from each of you is there's so many practical things that people can do. So although we understand that financial stress is a significant issue, if you can overcome those feelings that you might have that are unhelpful and stopping you from doing action, there's so many wonderful bits of information and suggestions that you've made to help people take a step forwards to financial well-being. In closing, is there any one particular gem that you may have heard in your own life journey, some wisdom from a grandparent or something, any one positive takeaway that you would recommend to our wonderful audience? I'm going to start with you, Sian.
Thank you, Nicola. I think for me, it's always going to be, it's never too late to start. It's never too early to start. Today is always the best day to take control of the things that you need to take control of, to live the life that you want to live. Nobody else is going to give you that. That is up to you to make the decision to be active, to be proactive in creating the life, whether it's your financial wellness, your mental wellness, whatever area you're feeling stressed in right now. There are so many people, and this last 2 days is testament to that. There's so many people who genuinely care about assisting you in achieving the life that you want to live. And it doesn't have to be compared to anybody else's life. You don't have to buy a big car because everybody else has a big car. Unless that's the only car you've ever dreamed of owning and want to drive, then yes, absolutely, achieve that. But it doesn't need to be a comparison to anybody else's life. It's always a good day to look at what you want to do and what you want to have and how you want to achieve that for yourself.
Thank you. Bianca?
I think that was lovely, actually, really, really good. It kind of makes me think, I think the best decision I ever made was starting to live my why. You've probably heard a lot about Simon Sinek and people talking about purposefulness and things like that. I'm very passionate about that. I feel like if you have something you're yearning to do, or there's a difference you want to make, or there's just a hobby you want to see if you can take somewhere, or there's just personally something that makes your day, I think it's really important to look at that and see what you can do with that. And for me, I've been lucky to make a career out of it, and I think there's probably opportunity for people to do that themselves in this current environment, and making use of free courses and things like that. But really, you know, just living your purpose and living the life you want to live. And I suppose further to that, if you are in a position where your finances, whether you're in a bit of debt trouble, or you're wanting to start investing, or you're looking at where you are from a retirement point of view, is just taking that time out to spend, to allow yourself to have time out to address some things with a notebook and really write those down. Because I think it's like what you were saying, once you start to open the door on, lift the lid on your thinking about where you want to go and who you want to be today, I think people start to come into your life.
Thank you. Katrina, what would you be suggesting? What gem?
Yeah, I think there's actually just something that's worthwhile saying between making decisions in the now and something that you want from more of an instant gratification point of view, and then looking at, well, actually, if our why is strong enough, it's usually down the line. It's somewhere that we want to be in a couple of years' time. So I think I've got a couple of gems from that point of view. The first is one passed down from my mum, which is around always live within your means. She's been very prevalent and in my ear about that for a very long time. And I think that sounds so simple, yet at the same point has quite a lot of value. So definitely living within your means. And I think the second point is really, it's actually a question, and I like to ask myself this quite often, which is around, what have you done, or what are you doing today to invest in your future self? And for me, that's a very strong one, because it's easy to give in, and it's easy to want to do the extra bits of online shopping, particularly if we're all at home at the moment, or that extra purchase here, the extra couple of decisions that if we were a little bit more conscious and aware of, you know, yourself, it might actually allow us to make a different decision in the present moment, and come back to what's really important at that point in time. And again, I think for the world in which we live in today, understanding that every little bit can count. So compound interest over a significant amount of time truly does make a big difference at the end of the day. Looking into your superannuation and asking yourself, even though there's access right now to taking super out early, is that really going to be the best choice for you in the future? Do you really have to do that? Is there another way for you to free up some of that money that you may need at the moment from a cash flow perspective in a different way? So I think that link between my future self and my current self and what should I be doing now that would be my gem.
Okay, and I guess if I can just maybe round that out, what I'm hearing that you all have in common with your suggestions is self-kindness. Because if we're not kind to ourselves, or we judge ourselves critically, or we beat ourselves up about bad financial decisions or habits we've had in the past, or we have self-limiting thoughts, then we actually disempower ourselves from taking up the fabulous learned advice and suggestions that you three have given. And we don't back ourselves in a way. So I guess from my perspective, I'd also say start with the kernel of self-kindness to manage your finances and go forwards. We've got some amazing comments coming in, and there's a few questions in terms of resources. Do any of you want to quickly have this opportunity to suggest some websites or something like that in the last minute before we get shut down?
Sure. I'll just quickly jump in with the question around the financial resources. The government's got a website called the Financial Capability, and that has both domestic and global research on financial wellbeing. So I would definitely recommend starting there, and I can pop the link into the chat as well for people to have a look at.
Okay, Bianca, any suggestions?
Yeah, of course I have my own site, which we have a fortnightly newsletter. We publish articles on women's money. So that's financy.com.au. In terms of resources, there are some fantastic personal finance books. Last year was just I've never seen so many hit the market from Australian authors. Canna Campbell, Lacey Flippich, these are just a couple of names. Natasha Janessence, Melissa Brown. There's quite a few books on the shelves at the moment on Amazon and Booktopia that have some sales on too at the moment, if that's of help.
Okay. I'm also aware there's plenty of financial literacy questionnaires available online if anyone wants to test their knowledge to see what skills they need. And I see Casey's here, so I guess thank you very much. What a wonderful, informative panel. Thank you very much, the three of you.
Thank you.